All right, so what have you been up to? You went down to Intellect last time I spoke to you. How was that show?
It was great. It was interesting to see the storm that came in was pretty impressive, which I think kept some of the attendance lower than they expected. But it was interesting to see the kind of push with the LoRaWAN that's kind of starting to really take shape in our industry, and then also the innovation lab that Doug Miller put together was one did a great job of putting all that together and got an amazing amount of support, and people were excited to contribute to the lab. And Travis and his team put together a very cool interface. So good job, Travis.
All right, so let's go ahead and welcome some of our guests. I'm getting ready to start sharing screen, working through a little technical, but welcome to Skellig, Amy, and Josh. Glad to have you here. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Hey, while we're waiting, I'll give you my new invention. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I finally decided to do it. So I've created a laxative, and I included a pain reliever in it, and I call it I be pooping.
Classic. Very, very classy. What do you do with that? Anybody?
And you buy it.
I don't know if I can follow that.
You buy it, and you buy a lot of it.
That's right. There you go. All right. Well, welcome. Thanks for filling some time for me, Alan. Welcome to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual workshop, Applying 21 CFR Beyond Life Science. Today, we're featuring some of our vendors, Kepware, Canary, Flow, and Inductive Automation. And this is possible today because Skellig has decided to help us guide through this process. So we've got Amy and Josh from Skellig here with us. Josh, Amy, tell us just a little bit, if you would, about Skellig and where your focus is and your background.
Sure. Yeah, so Skellig is a systems integrator. Historically, we've always been with life sciences and focused a lot on like DCS, but recently we've started in the past few years, recognize the need for Industry 4.0. So we're starting to transition into trying to implement like unified namespace essentially in life sciences.
Awesome. So life science pros, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And you've probably dealt with 21 CFR just a little bit, is my guess.
Couple times.
Showed up.
Great. Well, the goal today is twofold, right? First, the goal today is to show how our vendors would help configure their products or would advise their products be configured to help maintain an environment that would work for 21 CFR compliance. That's part one of the goal. Second part of the goal is for all of our non-life science audience is to put a case forward of why you should also care about 21 CFR and why you should consider these as best practices guiding how you deploy systems as well. Sound good?
Good.
All right, well, let's introduce the tech stack. From Canary, we have Steve Mason and Clark. Welcome, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. Thanks, Jeff.
And with Steve, we pick up the product guru. And so Steve is all things support on Canary. If you're a Canary user, you've probably talked to Steve. Well, hopefully you've never had to talk to Steve, right? But if you've ever had a question, you've probably talked to Steve at some point. And Clark, you're doing business development on Canary side?
Yes, sir. So working primarily with marketing and business development, but excited to share some details about the product for those that maybe you've heard about Canary or you're less familiar. I'll be sharing an overview. So I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. And Alan, you know these other three guys pretty well, don't you?
Yep. Lenny is my good friend with Flow Software. I have enjoyed many conversations with him and look forward to his participation today. And Kyle, have you is this your second? You were with us on the first one, right?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be part of the first Integrate Live ever. It's still one of my favorite activities that I've done. But yeah, that's my second one. Happy to be back.
We're excited to have you back and looking forward to more of these with you.
Absolutely.
And that leaves Travis. Hey, Travis, how are you, sir?
Doing well, guys. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we think that most everybody in the audience knows Travis, but in case you haven't met Travis yet before, you should. Travis is the Chief Technology Evangelist at Inductive Automation, and you have been with Inductive Automation even pre-ignition, correct?
Yeah, it's going on 20 years now. So I started with them when they were on the integration side of the business back in 2004. So it's been a crazy journey and still a lot more fun to ahead of us. So
that's absolutely right. Cool. All right. Well, hey, if it is your first time to an Integrate Live event, we want to say thank you and welcome you. And if it's your second, third, fourth, or 10th time to an Integrate Live event, we're so glad that you're here. Alan, walk us through a little bit about what Integrate Live is, the purpose of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the reason Jeff and I started this is really around the ability to figure out how we can not just align integrators and vendors, but choose a problem, really be able to work through that problem, and ultimately through a matter of these three common threads, right? So the three common threads are openness, willingness to work together with different vendors, with different technologies, being transparent about where your product as a vendor and an integrator fits in, and then ultimately being humble enough to share and contribute to the community so that the individual increases their knowledge and information and ability to add value to their company and their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been through this effort that we've gotten to know lots of new people. It's been absolutely incredible. You may not realize this on the other side of the camera, but the Integrate Live community has over 5,000 people that are receiving information through this. And it's just been awesome. In fact, Amy, Alan and I believe met you on the very first Integrate Live. Later on at the end of the event, we had a little virtual get to know room open, and I think that's the first time we met you.
Yep.
And now look, full circle, you're back here again. And along this path, Alan, we've gotten to really call people family, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And with that, I just is with a deep regret and sadness that we communicate that we have lost a partner in this community, somebody who has contributed to Integrate Live in multiple aspects. But Kevin Rutherford with Software Toolbox unfortunately has passed away, and we just want to say thank you to Software Toolbox for his contributing to the industry, and also just that our thoughts and prayers are with John, Software Toolbox family, and Kevin's family.
Yeah, it was absolutely tragic and way too early. Yeah, that's that is the tough part of extending and growing together, is that we share in everything together, the good and the bad. We do want to thank Software Toolbox and Canary, Flow, Opto22, Kepware, and Phoenix Contact for their continued support of this community. We could not do this and continue to do this without your support, and we thank you so much for that. All right, let's talk today about the specific business use case. Josh and Amy, what is it today that we're really looking to solve?
Right. So our business use case today is going to be a little different from the other Integrate Live episodes. Today, we're assuming that you kind of already engineered your Industry 4.0 solution, which is one that maximizes your data connectivity and accessibility. And now, before you deploy it to production, you need to ensure your data security, traceability, and trustworthiness is maintained. So the way that we're going to be doing that is by applying 21 CFR best practices to each part of our overall solution.
All right. So I don't know how often the two of you get to dabble in space outside of life science, or if your background was before you were with Skellig, how much time you spent in life science before that. But a lot of times 21 CFR is a bit of a mystery. It might be a mystery to people still in life science, but I know outside of life sciences, we don't have a great awareness of it. Is that what you find as well?
I think if you're in life sciences, you're pretty familiar with it. But yeah, I do think that if you're outside of life sciences, it sounds like a crazy acronym that you're just making up.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's take a second. Let's do a little audience poll, and we're going to test the audience, and let's see how familiar the audience is with 21 CFR. So, if you don't mind, please, we've got 3 questions for you. Give yourself about 10 to 15 seconds per question, and would love to see where you rank in your knowledge coming into this. All right, final seconds.
Hey, Jeff, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Do you hear about the zombies that are dyslexic? They only eat Brian's.
Brains.
They only eat Brian's.
Brian's. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. It's the vegetarian zombies that only eat
No,
grain.
they're dyslexic.
No, I get it. I've crossed my own dad jokes. That's a shame.
All
Hey,
right.
hear about the vegetarian zombies? All right. So, audience, thank you for the votes. And it looks like 73% of you got question number 1 right. What does the acronym CFR stand for? It is the Code of Federal Regulations. Well done. Question number 2, what decade was the 21 CFR Part 11 published? The audience said, the majority of the audience answered 1990s. Second answer was 2000s. 1990s it is. Well done. And question, I can't believe the majority got that. Well done. That's a tough one to know. And number 3, how familiar are you with the requirements for 21 CFR Part 11? So this is great. 5% of our audience, only 5% of the audience said way too familiar. 13% said very familiar. So for the mass majority of the folks on today, it is a some knowledge, familiar, or no knowledge. And so this will be really helpful, I think.
Just
Awesome.
for transparency.
Yep.
I
Where are you?
I have some knowledge.
Some knowledge. Okay.
Not very. And it's interesting because I now, now that I'm working with 3M, I am I'm going to have to get much more knowledgeable about this guideline.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that. Amy, Josh, can you get Alan up to speed?
Sure thing. So as you said in the poll, what is 21 CFR? It's Title I of the Code of Federal Regulation. So what is that? Well, back in the day, it was kind of agreed that it would be great if everyone could trust that the food and drugs that they're using were safe. So to do this, the FDA created this Code of Federal Regulations to protect health by ensuring safety, efficacy, and quality of products. So it's a giant standard full of regulations that apply to a couple different industries. Some of the more popular known ones are pharma, food, cosmetics, veterinary drugs, etc. Now, within the CFR, there are a bunch of different parts depending on the industry. Actually, what I think would be better is if we went ahead and opened it up instead of reading the slide. But so we can go ahead and navigate if we want to see.
Great. Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah. So as the slide says, Part 210 and Part 211 pertains to life sciences. I picked that one because, that's my background.
And so just for reference,
so to tell you where it is, sorry. So you're going to go to Chapter 1, Subchapter C.
Let me drop this real fast in the chat so that everybody has the link as well. Sorry, I'm trying to do I'm multitasking. There we go. All right. So if you'd like to follow along in the chat, you'll find the URL for this. So let's expand it.
Expand this out. Yep. So you have chapter 1. You can go to subchapter C, and there you'll find part 210 and part 211. And that outlines the good manufacturing practices for life sciences. So the background on this is this section was actually issued in 1962. Congress instructed the FDA to require that all drugs being produced adhere to GMP, which is defined in this section. The advantage is you standardize and ensure drugs were produced consistently at high quality. And you can go ahead and read it if you want. In there is where you see why life sciences has to document so much, why we need batch records, investigation, hold on to records for X amount of time, yada, yada. But with or without 21 CFR, everyone in manufacturing cares about product quality, and everyone in manufacturing keeps data records. Now, I mentioned this issuance because this was issued in the 1960s. Well, in the 1960s, everybody, with or without 21 CFR, was using paper to keep track of these records. Now, what's cool about 21 CFR is it's like a living document. I don't know if you can see at the top, but it tells you when it was last updated. Since the 60s, obviously, technology evolved. And with it, the FDA realized, hey, we can actually take advantage of some of this new technology. We should find ways to use it compliantly. And that's where part 11 comes in. So part 11 is pretty simple. It's basically establishing the criteria for how you can compliantly store your records electronically instead of on paper. So if you want, we can go find that. Or did you already get to it? Yep.
Yeah, and it's a little confusing, right, Amy? Because you would think part 11 would precede part 200, but what we figured out is that they've numbered the sections inside of each of the subchapters in batches of 100, right? So subchapter A gets part 1 through 99, subchapter B gets part 100 through 199, etc. And that's why part 11 is older than part 210 or 211, for instance.
Right, exactly. So if we scroll through 21 CFR part 11, it's not that big. You'll see there are kind of 3 big subparts to A, B, and C. Part A kind of outlines when you need to use it. And when you need to use it is when you want to digitize any records that you previously had on paper and were submitting to the FDA. Part B says you can now use electronic records. But if you do, you need to have controls in place to ensure authenticity, integrity, and confidentiality of these records. And these records need to easily be available for review. Part C says you can now use electronic signatures instead of writing everything out by hand. But again, if you do, you're going to need to have unique usernames and passwords. And you need to have some way to verify or test that these controls are in place. And so generally speaking, what's that look like? That means you have restricted access to your records and groups. Nobody's going to be able to just come in and change things. If you're doing signatures, you're going to have a computer-generated timestamp. You're going to have audit logs and trails, etc. We'll get into more of how we can support 21 CFR 11 compliance later in the integration part. The point of this section, though, or this discussion, is just to say that 21 part 11 was initially created so the FDA could verify that your digital records are just as robust as your previous paper ones. But you know who can take advantage of this besides the FDA? Literally everyone in manufacturing. So I'm going to actually pass this on to Josh now so he can talk about some of the big advantages to adhering to 21 CFR part 11, if you want to jump ahead.
All right. So Josh, Amy's given us this summary, and now you're ready to go with why should you use, yeah?
Can you go to the next slide? We kind of already covered that one. So if you want to just show everything, I'm just going to talk, Jeff. So as you'll see, as Jeff's kind of showing everything on the screen there, there's a lot of different reasons of why you should consider using part 11. I mean, you have to if you're in our life science world, but if you're in other worlds, why you might want to consider using it. It can improve efficiency in your site, lead to cost savings, increase your data integrity and security, and can increase your transparency, which will overall reduce the risk of different things happening in your site. because you have that transparency and connection to your data. And instead of just reading this, I just kind of wanted to share some cool ideas that have been used recently in my experiences that helped us become more nimble and enable different features that really weren't around before the digital worlds of why we need Part 11. So, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was home, we couldn't be at the same place, but life sciences typically lived in the paper world where paper was king. Everyone had to physically sign the paper themselves, write their signatures, do the testing. But as a way to fill a stopgap at the beginning of the pandemic, we started using software like DocuSign. So we can send the documents all around, have it reviewed by each party individually, have that record of them signing that document individually, but still bring it all together and it's still validated. Everyone did the review and approvals that they need to do. And we're still able to accept it in our world, even though it wasn't physically done in the same place like it had been done for years. And it kept us, going at a fast pace as we did, so we could produce things like the COVID vaccines, like as fast as they came out. Some other ways, like I brought up, like cost savings, obviously eliminating paper is a big cost. You don't need to buy that anymore. But having the digital records can increase your integrity and security because it's digital, like the names really suggests. The connections will really help you see on like an HMI or something, what's going on in your plant, what might be happening, any adverse events or something might be going on. So another example was I was working to connect a bioreactor at a site that really hadn't been connected before. Everything was siloed, but we connected the bioreactor, was having a problem with one of its an MFC or something. I don't exactly remember, but if you caught it in the alarm condition at the right time, you could reset it and you'd be good to go. So we made a maybe not so Part 11 compliant solution, but we connected everything digitally and it saved this batch that was over $1 million. And as any life sciences client knows, any batch is about that much money. But just even having put in, 20% of that cost into saving that one batch, it gave us a real big return on what it saved for us. And overall, just the idea of integrity and security is kind of like cybersecurity, the security principle of least privilege. So giving everyone the privileges they absolutely need to get their job done, but nothing more, and to keep sure they stay in like the line of what you want them to do. And that goes to kind of transparency with having the audit trails of knowing what they did, so you can do your investigations to see what happened. And also, if you made a change in your code or something and you need to revert back, it should be easy to see, hey, this is how it was before. Let's just go back and we're good to go. And then one of the acronyms that kind of the industry created, I think the FDA did, was ALCOA. And that's kind of, it's listed out down there. So it's attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Those are all principles that we use for data integrity to help make sure we keep up what we say we're going to do. And in recent years, they've added a plus at the end of it. So those plus things stand for complete, consistent, enduring, and available. So Alcoa Plus is kind of overall a good summary of what 21 CFR Part 11 really is. And pharma loves a good acronym. So,
So what is it? So what about compliance? Because that's, wearing the vendor hat, that's what I've always heard the focus on is, hey, how do we put your solution in and ensure compliance? Are you compliant as a solution?
So it's hard for the vendors themselves to be compliant. They can't exactly go to the FDA and say like, hey, I want to make a software that's 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, like you can with some other bodies. Like, for example, MQTT, you could go to that organization and get certified in using MQTT and say your software is good with MQTT. But it's not really quite like that with the Part 11 world, because it really boils down to what each site determines is acceptable for their current unique requirements and also the risks they're willing to take. At the end of the day, it really boils down to the site getting the softwares, doing their due diligence of installing them the right way, documenting them the right way, and testing them and validating them, and making sure they have all the policies, procedures in place that should the FDA come, they see everything's, all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, everything's happy. You can show them all this stuff's good. And the worst that could happen is like the FDA says, maybe you need to improve your process, but you got everything in order. It's really the lack of having any of those policies, procedures, checks and balances in place that would really trip up a company for not being compliant for Part 11.
Okay. So Amy, Josh, walk us through, I guess, the last slide you have here on why this matters even more today for the non-life science or just for the integration community, the automation community, manufacturing in general.
Right. So the big shift that everyone has realized is the way to be successful in manufacturing is by having data. Data is information if you have access to it. If without digitizing everything and leaving it in silos or leaving it in paper, it becomes really difficult to troubleshoot, to understand what happened, and to ensure essentially like your product quality. And so to that, I say that 21 CFR Part 11 is only part of the solution. What you also need as well is to embrace a Industry 4.0 solution, which is an architecture that really focuses on that data accessibility. If you have an architecture that can digitize more data, it's even more important that you're using the 21 CFR best practices to ensure that data remains just as robust and secure in this new architecture as it did with your inefficient 3.0 paper architecture.
That's a great point. So really, it's not even just, hey, life science, you've got 21 CFR Part 11 nailed. It's okay, but now what?
Right.
Right. And for the rest of the industry, maybe you're doing an incredible job on your digital transformation, but you should also be looking at 21 CFR Part 11 as part of that strategy of your minimal requirements or what you're actually shooting for.
I mean, kind of like we said, it came out in the 90s and we're still talking about it today. So
Yeah, 30 years later.
something else needs to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Amy, do you see the shift in people transitioning specifically in life science to an Industry 4.0, something that's more robust in not being so locked down, proprietary type of systems, or do you see the kind of a slower migration in the life sciences?
I think it's a slower migration that's starting more with like lab scale and contract manufacturers because they are more open to newer technologies because they're smaller. But those who get it are going to see much more advantages. And I think that once its precedent is set, it's going to really start to take off. What's exciting though is, I mean, even within Skellig, we've already started to do some projects in life sciences implementing this sort of more 4.0 architecture. And I mean, Josh can speak to it. Those have had great results because with your data being open, you're really reducing, if you have this architecture, you're really reducing the amount of validation you have to do and engineering costs. And then if you're using 21 CFR Part 11, which we do, you now have so much more information because the more data you have digitized, the more context you can build, which in pharma is fantastic for all your investigations and compliance. And outside of pharma, it's also fantastic because that's how you're going to be able to ensure you're still creating really high quality product.
Yeah,
I don't know, Josh, if you want to add to that. Yeah.
I'll just say a quick anecdote is my client I worked with for the past year and a bit, we were able to install, document, test, and validate a Ignition SCADA system and Canary Historian within a year, which was a pretty big feat based on other experiences with different data historians and SCADA systems of being able to get to that point of, and the deployment really was giving full visibility to everyone at the site of all of the environmental monitoring conditions in all of the suites. So it's kind of cool to see within a year of nothing, the client was really greenfield, we started with a blank virtual server and ended in a year with a fully validated Canary historian, ignition system, collecting data through MQTT and showing it through ignition. So that quickness really will help make things in pharma a lot more agile.
And data readiness, data governance, important focuses as part of Industry 4.0. Alan, you and I have done a lot of work in conversation, as well as with a lot of the men and women on this community. In fact, Amy and I just a couple weeks ago went through a slide deck that we're going to be presenting tomorrow in a webinar. David Sadi from Software Toolbox and myself are going to do a unified analytics framework webinar called Building Better Data Foundations for Manufacturing. That's tomorrow morning. Feel free to scan the QR code and register for that. Even if you don't attend, we'll be sending a recording of that to all of those that have registered. The concept here is, how do you actually build the infrastructure? How do you put those foundations in place so that when you start really focusing on your digitalization and you apply these principles, how do you share that information to everyone and everything that needs it? And how do you do that without duplicating business rules and duplicating engineering work, specifically so that you can turn that data into actionable information? And we're going to provide a architecture and a strategy for that in tomorrow's webinar. All right, Josh and Amy, you ready to shift over, and we'll get the vendors introduced, let them position themselves, and then they'll start showing how they'll configure their products to help a end user actually get their compliance on 21 CFR.
Yeah, awesome. Go for it.
All right. So first up, Kyle, introduce Kepware to the team.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. So real quick, I think I'm supposed to tell a dad joke here, but I'm not. Yes. I'm not a dad yet, so I don't want to be faux pas about it. That one's a little bit of a thinker. There it is. Alan just got it. Thank you. Anyways, so Amy and Josh talked a lot about the importance of data, and Jeff and Alan at the beginning talked about the importance of sort of openness and working with other vendors. And believe it or not, that's exactly what Kepware is. So if you don't know Kepware, we deal solely in industrial data connectivity. So really what that means is, if you're out on your plant floor, if you're out, looking at all of your different suites in your pharmaceutical facility, if you're out in the oil field, if you're out at a water wastewater plant, there's a lot of equipment out there that's got different types of PLCs from different vendors, or if they're from the same vendor, maybe they're legacy or modern. Just a whole bunch of equipment out there that has this really valuable data in it. But the challenge is getting that data out of that device and into various softwares that will enable you to make those real-time decisions, or those just informed decisions. That's what Kepware does. So we take the data from one place and we pipe it out to the other. There's a few ways we do that. A lot of the protocols we support vary from OPC UA, OPC DA, all the classic OPCs, MQTT. We can send stuff to databases, all sorts of good stuff. And actually right here, as Jeff kind of is showing, we've got I think it's over 150 at this point, different drivers that we can support. So the better way to say it, I guess, is if there's a piece of equipment out on your plant floor, there's a very, very high probability that Kepware can connect to that. And to be clear, I think some people may be a little wary. PTC acquired Kepware back in 2015, 2016. We are still very agnostic. Obviously we can still pipe data to ThingWorx. There are some advantages to that, but we still try to be as agnostic as possible, meaning that, hey, if you've got an OPC client, if you've got an MQTT broker, whatever it is, we don't care. Our job and our focus is mainly just getting that valuable data out of your field devices and piping that to where it needs to go. And actually, fun fact here, part of the Kepware interview is you actually have to name all of these in under a minute. I somehow did it. I don't know. It was wild though.
What's your favorite?
There's a sales answer, but I'll say our most popular one is the Allen Bradley ControlLogix followed by the Siemens Ethernet, and then Modbus TCP. But my favorite, I think, surprisingly isn't. Oh, it is listed here. The Universal Device Driver. I'm not just saying that because it's our newest. It is actually really cool. It's a configurable driver. So if folks who have used Kepware in the past are probably familiar with Yukon, which is a way to build your own driver within Kepware, which worked great if you were using Serial, but it was kind of clunky. But the UDD is a little bit more of a modern interface. You can use JavaScript to go in, use Kepware's backend, and essentially build out your own driver. So if there happens to be some nuanced device out on the plant floor or wherever, and we don't have a driver for it, you can actually go in and build your own. And on the side, it's kind of cool. You can do some interesting things like we were actually able to pull weather data from weather.com and put that into Kepware. Is that practical? No, but it was a fun little project during COVID.
Oh, that's fun. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Kyle. And we'll have hear back from you here just in a couple minutes.
Great.
All right, Travis, walk us through the IA slides, please.
All right, perfect. All right, well, Ignition is an inductive automation software product, and it is a universal platform for all types of applications, typically fall in the category of HMI and SCADA. Of course, MES is a big category, and IoT, or building Industry 4.0 type applications. Ignition itself is a kind of an enablement platform. It's a development environment on steroids and allows you to really build, like I said, any of these applications very easily. It is very simple. The licensing model is unlimited. So with the server license, you can install Ignition on a central server, VM, physical server, deploy through Docker, whatever. But with one server, you can have unlimited tags, screens, clients, projects, device connections, and more. It is fully cross-platform, can run on any OS, allows for any deployment model. It is based on IT standard technologies. We don't do anything proprietary with the product, very much focused on open standards out there, OPC UA, MQTT, things like that. And a lot of companies leverage Ignition and Kepware together because Kepware has an extensive driver set, and we can connect to that through OPC UA and bring that data into Ignition and start building applications with that data. It is very much a server client architecture. It's all web managed, meaning you just use your browser to go to the configuration. You can launch a designer, you can see the application you built, and it is very modular in that you can pick and choose pieces that you would like to have. So next slide here. One of the unique parts about Ignition is that it can connect to anything and can deploy data to anybody. So we have, like I said, drivers for certain PLCs. We can connect through OPC UA. We also support MQTT as a pub sub protocol to both publish data and subscribe to data. We can talk to SQL databases. We'll show an example of that here today. Any database out there, we're agnostic. We can connect to web services, REST APIs, other services there, connect to MES, ERP systems, bring in LIMS devices, and all that data you can bring into Ignition. You can display it on screen, historize it, provide alarming on it, move data around any way you want. We can connect to cloud services. But as I said, most importantly, get data to people on PCs, mobile devices, touch panels, smart TVs, you name it. So
Sorry about this curse of the touchpad.
Yeah, no worries. So it really kind of connection hub for all your data there. And like I said, very easy to get it up and running. You can go to the website, you can download a Ignition, a 2-hour trial period. You can fully evaluate every part of Ignition, see how it works. Every 2 hours, it just stops. You press the reset button and you can keep playing around with it. And you can deploy it really anywhere. So if you want to deploy it on your laptop, on a virtual machine, you want to do it through Docker, you want to do it on premise or in the cloud, we support all of those options.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, Travis.
No problem.
All right, let's talk about Canary. Clark.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Well, I don't have an obligatory dad joke, but now that Amy has explained what 21 CFR Part 11 is, we know that it's not a Honda dirt bike, and it's also not a new COVID variant. But another thing that she mentioned was, not only just on your journey to compliance, having the right vendors and the right infrastructure in place to be able to do that. And Canary is one of those tools. So for those of you that are not very familiar with Canary, we're a product, or we produce industrial database technology that makes it really easy for you to use your process data. So if you're working with process data, then I can imagine that, like in a perfect world, you're going to want to store everything, do it at a high polling rate, assign context to that raw data, and then also make it accessible to every person or third-party tool in your organization. And then finally, you want to interpret and act on that data in a way that actually maximizes the potential of your operation. So these are just a couple of the goals that we help our customers achieve. But honestly, at the end of the day, we understand that engineers, if you're an operator, an executive, IT folks, and just everyone from the plant floor, all the way up to the C-suite, you all just want to use your data. And that's what Canary helps you do. So really, when you have the right tools in place that can make it easy to use your process data and automate your workflows, then the effect can be really transformational on the overall efficiency of your operation and the confidence of your teams. So some of the obstacles that you might face, like on your digital transformation journey, could be database management problems that leave you feeling frustrated and stuck. Also, competing priorities between maximizing security and then continuing production. And then finally, licensing restrictions that make it a headache to get your data out of your system. And they really just kill your ROI in terms of deployment and the time that that takes. Jeff, you can go to the next slide. But with Canary, you really have the ability to securely collect and store and retrieve vast amounts of data without database administration skills, and you can do it all at a price that's fair. So for over 35 years, Canary's helped engineers and organizations probably just like yours, and the Canary system has been installed over 20,000 times in over 70 countries, and it's currently in use in every major industry. So this solution is something that's a great fit for both large enterprise solutions and all small utilities and pretty much everything else in between. And you can go to the next slide. And the way that we really help our customers is in 3 simple steps. So first of all, we start by collecting and storing your data. So we collect it using any industry standard protocol, and then we store it into our historian using our industry-leading lossless compression algorithm that actually never interpolates, it never averages, and it never drops any values. So you retain the original data forever. Next, after that, we assign context to your data by building calculations. You can build events and then asset models that really transform your raw data values. And then finally, the Canary system, it allows you to freely publish data to your favorite tools. And our HTML-based visualization tool called Axiom, it's super intuitive and it allows your organization to easily build reports. You can build trends, dashboards, and a ton of other things, and you can do it from desktop or a mobile device. And Jeff, you can go to the last slide. So I'll close by saying that the Canary system is really going to help you understand your operation, hopefully at a deeper level, and get the most out of the data that drives your process and your strategy. So it's going to help you satisfy your regulatory requirements, specifically for 21 CFR Part 11, which Steve is going to jump into more. But that's pretty much it. And if you have any interest in getting to know Canary more, then at the conclusion of this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to connect with you, or there may be an opportunity to ask questions here at the end. So that's it. We'd love to hear from you. And Jeff, thanks for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you, Clark. All right, Lenny.
Cool, thanks, Jeff. Hi, everybody. Lenny from Flow Software. I'm I think the only international on the group. Sorry for my accent. It's just the way I've been born. But I think Amy said it the best. What's the problem with Industry 3.0? It's this point-to-point integration that does not scale. And it should not be this hard in this day and age to actually get information out of our systems. And this is where Flow comes in. Flow creates an analytics framework that allows us to get rid of the point-to-point integration, actually make it available for us to reuse all of this integration that we want to use to actually turn the data into actionable information that we want them to act on. Very important on that is we have to have the data governance in place. The whole part of this journey here is to show how can we trust information. How do we know that when we calculate a KPI that we can trust that calculation? How is it calculated from any data source? Doesn't matter where I'm pulling that data from. I need to make sure that I can trust that information that I need to act on. We need to add as much context as we want to that information, because with more context, more questions can't be answered about how can I improve my actual operation there. And it's really there to give you the freedom. We spoke about open architecture in this community of IntegrateLive every time. And it's really there to create this analytics app that's really free from wherever I need to pull the information from to create the information that we required. And it's reusable. Every little piece of work that we do to create these integration is reusable, and I'm not actually orphaning any integration work from that perspective. Again, The Flow Analytics Framework gives you all of the tools that is required to actually build out your analytics. Anything from creating a unified information model, doesn't matter where the data sources are coming from, connecting to all the different data sources that are siloed, be able to create context between all of these different data sources. Very important to also create context of time. I know it sounds silly, but context of what am I actually looking at? Shiftly data, hourly data, daily data, all of that must be timestamped and stamped in buckets or created into buckets from a KPI management perspective. We've got the calculation engine that will reuse the calculation every time the same way. Every time you rerun it, every time you need to create a new hourly worth of data, you are assured that we run that KPI the same way every time. So you've got data integrity from that perspective as well. Then very important, we need to store it. We need to timestamp it. We need to stamp it with potential user credentials. So we store all of that data inside of our KPI and event frame database solution. Nothing in Flow is held hostage. Everything is available. We've got the capability to share this information to other tools, other solutions. It can be done via an internal dashboarding tool. It can be done through our notification services. It can be done through our open API. And then we can also share it. We can share this timestamped, rubber-stamped information to potentially data marts and data warehouses where people can now utilize this information as well. So really, it's there for us to create this information framework that we call it the single source of truth, where we are sure that you have this capability to trust the information that you need to act on.
Thank you, Lenny. Hey, Lenny, you work with data scientists on the regular, right?
Yep.
You might be surprised to learn that there are only 2 types of data scientists. There are those that can there are those that can extrapolate from incomplete data.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow, Jeff.
All right, time to solve the problem. All right, listen, we're going to frame this up a little different. Before, you've always watched us build out the solution for a project. Now you have to pretend like the project's already been done. Project's done. You've decided to use Kepware. You've decided to use Inductive Automation, Canary, and Flow. We applaud your decision. Well done. Now it's time to configure those 4 products to be in a way that you'll be compliant with 21 CFR. So that's what we're building, right, Amy? Right, Josh? We're not really building anything. That's what we're configuring. How's that? All right. So let's do some sharing of screens, and Kyle, you should be first up, correct?
All right.
Make you the host. Crossing fingers. Please tell me.
I can. Looks good to me. Everyone can see my desktop, and there we go. Cool. All right. So everyone should be. Yes.
Kyle and our vendors, I'm going to have to keep each of you strictly to 10 minutes. Okay.
I'll give you 8. How about that?
All right. Go. There
we go. Cool. All right. So what we're looking at here is actually Kepware's graphic user interface or GUI. As a side note, the GUI does not have to be open as Kepware's runtime is running. They are 2 separate services. So everything you're seeing now, again, is just for configuration. And if you notice, I may have gone maybe a little too fast, but when we started up Kepware, you'll notice that it just started up. There was no login sort of information there. And we're going to change that in a little bit. But for those who don't know, just real quick about the GUI. So down at the bottom here, we've got the event log. We're going to do a lot of focus today on what the event log is and information you can get from it and ways to store it. But essentially, any change that you make to the configuration, or if there's any error messages or warnings or anything like that, they will be displayed down here in the event log. Up to the left, we have the project tree, what looks like old Windows 95. Thank you, random guy from LinkedIn, for pointing that out. It's true. It's easy, but it works. Though it does look a little old, and that's fine. But the majority of the configuration for your project, for adding drivers to your configuration, is going to be done in here. And then finally, this sort of space here, I think there is an actual name. I think it's called the details plane, but that's just where you're going to find the information about your drivers or the devices that you add. And note that there's no live info here. This is just configuration, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So again, so we're assuming here, magic wand, hey, look at that, our project is built. We've got all sorts of stuff going on here. Now, how do we get this compliant, or what tools can we use to help meet those compliance that you're trying to implement here? Well, the first thing I would do, again, going back to saying, hey, when we first logged in, we just automatically got logged in as an admin. You can actually see that here, Kepware as default user. Why don't we go in and actually change that and maybe add some groups? So what we're going to do down here, we're going to right click on this little admin console. We go to settings. And then we will add our super long password, jam those exclamation points in there. Oops, too many. There we go. All right, and then now we're looking at the administrative console. So what I would do here, the first thing is to go over to this user manager tab, and we can actually see, oops, got ahead of myself there. Start from scratch. So we can actually go in and add different groups. So why don't we go in, we'll add a group. We'll call it engineering. And then we can actually, if we wanted to, lock this down a little bit more. So we can give read-only access. We could go down to the tag level and determine what that group can do, whether they can read the values, write values, all of that good stuff. So for this one, we're just going to leave as read-only. So we'll click OK. We can go in, add a user. We'll just call it E1. We'll give it a password. And if you look there, we actually require that 14 letter or 14 character password, which is great for cybersecurity, annoying for demos, but it is what it is. So we've just created a group, we've created a user, but we're not done yet. So we actually have to go in and actually enable that login upon starting the GUI. But before we do that, I actually want to go over here and talk a little bit about the event log. And wow, that is interesting. Anyone else seen that? Kind of going away. Oh, there we go. Never mind, I got it.
Yeah.
Oh, good. That was odd. Anyway, so with the event log, there's actually a couple of things we can do here. One, we can go and actually we can change where the event log gets saved to. So you could change that out. Let's say maybe you had one server with all of your configurations or all of your logging data. You can change it there. We can also go in and adjust how long, how many records, and what and how the event log is stored. So we can actually go in, and I would say if you're, Kepware is a very set and forget product. So I'd go in and I would say, hey, just change it to extended data store. And then you can actually go in and again, just make some adjustments for the file. So you can go through there, and whatever fits best for your application, that's where you go and change out the event log. Additionally, if we wanted to, oops, fix that back. If we wanted to, we can go back and actually change some of those security policies for those particular groups. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is actually go in and just make sure that we've got that next time we log in, we can actually get that user login box. So we'll hit apply, and then we will actually do that. We'll log out. We will log back in. Everyone can see my super messy desktop. And then boom, we're created, we're shown with this login. So now let's log in as an engineer. We'll click connect. We can see that it's read only. That's awesome. And then we can see down here, we can actually see I'm now logged in as me, as my Windows username with my Kepware username. Now, one of the neat things about one of our newer products here, and I know we're coming up on time, but one of the newer offerings is we actually have integration with the Windows Active Directory. So this becomes, if you've got one instance of Kepware, sure, you can go in and create that, the username and groups. But what if we're looking at 100 or 200 instances of Kepware? That can become very cumbersome to manage all of those. So that's why we have that Windows Active Directory sort of tie in there. So one other thing I want to show real quick. So we saw that was read only. We can actually go and we can still see all the settings, And what's interesting is you can actually go and change them, but it won't let you click OK or apply. So you can still see some of the settings there, but none of them will save. Now, the other part, and this is more of just a, hey, look at this cool new feature that I love bragging about. But for those who have known Kepware for a long time, when you open up Quick Client normally with a large project, all the channels get added into that Quick Client project, which is cumbersome if you have hundreds or thousands of channels. Well, now you can actually go in, right click on the particular channel or driver, and you can actually launch Quick Client and just see that one particular driver. I know that seems such a small quality of life change, but man, it is groundbreaking. It has saved me so much time. Anyways, yes, it is a huge deal. But yeah, so in general, so as we go in, we start to make changes. All of that will be recorded in the event log. The best way to enhance that, again, is to either have that Windows Active Directory tie-in so you can see exactly who made a change and when and what. So you can do that with Windows Active Directory, or going in and just making your own groups within Kepware. And again, additionally, you can go and change where and how the event log gets saved. So again, I think Amy and Josh mentioned it, where it's not necessarily up to the vendors to be compliant, but we can help you get to where you want to be within your environment for that compliance.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Kyle. Well done. And you, man, right on time too. All right. Kyle, I have to either figure out how to take host back from you, which it's not letting me. Can you release host back to me? Or
there you go.
Thanks. All right. Thank you. All right, Steve. You are now hosting.
Yeah.
Share away, sir.
Yeah. Well, I'll start. I think I have some time. I will share my dad joke, if that's okay, first. I think it counts as a dad joke, but my son asked me the other day why our chicken coop has 2 doors. And I told him, well, if it had 4 doors, it would be a chicken sedan. So there you go. Corny dad joke. Okay. Let me share.
How do you feel that went, Steve?
I need to practice, I think, a little bit more, but
I thought it was good. I thought it was good.
Well,
You know the difference between a good joke and a bad joke? Timing.
Yes, timing. All right. On to CFR part 11, 21 dash whatever. I think I got the acronym correctly. Okay. So the first thing, this is our Canary admin. So this is what we use to configure all of our services. Here are all the services that I have running on my machine. And so through this tool, you can make changes and configure it the way that you want it to. And so the first thing I want to demonstrate is how to create an audit log of those changes that are being made, so you can actually look back and see, okay, who made the changes and what do they actually do. So if we go down to configuration, and then on the left, we have verbosity, and we have this enable EAL, which is our audit logging. And so once this is checked, that creates this second database here. So all of our services write to this default database. The audit messaging gets written to both. And it gets written to both because eventually this default one will get trimmed once it gets to be so large. Whereas the audit messages, they're retained indefinitely. Okay. So if I'm looking at the default message log, I can go back to the audit tab here, and I can just filter off of those. And I can choose the audit category. And there you can see what changes have been made and who changed them. Okay, so this is just looking at the default one. When I scroll down, eventually this is getting trimmed. So this is only going back to the 23rd of May. If I go back, I can just look at the audit log itself. And now I have history all the way back to February. This is when I probably actually enabled my audit messaging. Okay. So that's kind of how that accomplished that traceability, who did what. And so if I go and I make a change, let's say I go into my OPC collector And I just turn off my one session, so I am connecting to a Kepware OPC server. So if I disable that, there it goes. Go back to messages. And I scroll back up to the top. You can see that I stopped that Kepware session. And there it is. Okay. And so that's the first part. And then I want to show you, so who has actual access to this admin, who can come in and make changes. So we would control that through the admin tile itself. And so if I am a user who's logged on to the actual server locally, I can just open up the admin and I have access to make whatever changes I want. So I can restrict local admin access if I want by disabling this. And then I would be forced to authenticate whenever I do open up the admin client, whenever I'm trying to connect. The same thing happens if I try to connect to a remote admin service on another machine, which I can kind of demonstrate what that authentication looks like. So up in the top right-hand corner, so this is a list of other machines on the network. So maybe I want to hop over to Raf's Pub and get a pint. And there we go. I am forced to authenticate in order to actually connect and make changes on this Raf's Pub server. So,
And Steve,
yeah,
is that using Active Directory? Oh, it looks like it is.
yes. So I'm going to use my Windows credentials here. And if I can get this correct, see if it'll let me connect. There we go. So now I can make changes on here, and those changes would obviously get logged into the message log on here. So let me go back to my local host. Yeah,
One of the nice features, and again, I'm leaning into my Canary experience, but one of the nice features about that is that the only services that you now have access to on that machine are the Canary services that you can stop and restart from within the admin. Right. So by forcing remote access only for Canary admin, you're actually keeping someone from being able to access services that are not inside of Canary.
Right. Yep. And then here's so this allow list, and this is what we hit the Windows AD. You can add your users, your groups onto this allow list who can actually connect and make changes there. So that's how we would control that. And then the final thing I'll touch on, so as far as version control, so I'll go back to OPC collector to kind of demonstrate that. So if I look at this test session that I have, scroll down here, so there are 160 tags in this session. So if I make a change to this logging configuration, let's just say I remove a tag, I'll remove this first one. So I'm at 160 tags right now. I remove that. This again, we get logged in the messages that I'm making a change. So now I'm down to 159. So the other thing that we do is we keep a backup. We keep 14 backups of the logging config. So this would be the current one that I just saved. And this was the last previous one that we had configured. So if I wanted to revert back to this, I could just get rid of this or rename it. Do that. Yep. Yes, and we'll have to restart the service. So come down to my OPC collector. Set that back up. And if I hop back in there, it's back to 160 tags. And I'm back to the previous version if I need to.
Great. And you said 14 days of, or 14 files, not
14,
days.
yeah, 14 versions, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. You did good on time also. Thank you, Steve. And then if there's any questions for either Kepware or Canary, please use the Q&A, and we're going to make sure we have a time for Q&A here at the end. That's why we're holding to a little bit of time now. All right, Steve, if you'll release your host.
Okay. I'm not certain where that is done.
click on your name in the participants list under more. Actually, what I was able to reclaim, so you're all right.
All right, cool.
All right, Travis, making you the host.
Awesome. Can you see that okay now?
Gotcha.
All right. So first off, we're going to show some best practices here, and but I have a question for you there, Jeff. Where are the average things manufactured? The satisfactory. So we want to show how to be more than satisfactory
factory
today.
Like
That's
the
right.
Saddest.
No, or it could be that the satisfactory. Like it's just okay. So we want to show how we can go above and beyond that here today. So there's gonna be two parts to the presentation here for Ignition, and one is on the configuration in terms of how we can do audit trails and the configuration and the connectivity and the backups, and then the other part of it's going to be on the front end, which is the application that somebody's building. There's got to be in some cases there's got to be access permissions, and there's got to be, the ability to re-log in to validate who somebody is before doing some action. So I want to show both of those here today. What I'm showing right now, though, is a link, and I'm sure we'll share these links with everybody. We have a best practices guide for Ignition on 21 CFR Part 11, and you can go through it. It's a PDF, and there's a lot to it. What's important about it is that this is a shared responsibility model. I think we talked about this earlier, but Ignition has all the ability to become 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, but it requires configuration within Ignition. It requires the customer to do certain things as well. So it kind of has to be that collaboration between we can't just check a box and say, yep, it's all out of the box. It's 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. We have to do some things, and we'll show you some of those here today. In particular, starting on page 8 of the document, the best practices, it explains some of the things you can do, and I'll be going through these here so you can see what that looks like. So, all right, with that being said, let me see, how do I move this? There we go. I'm going to first come in. So here's Ignition. I have Ignition installed on my machine. The first thing that I want to show is in terms of authentication in Ignition, how that works. And we have two different forms of authentication. We can tie into, if I go users and roles, I can tie into an Active Directory service, and we can use that both for the configuration aspect of Ignition as well as the runtime. And that is a great way. A lot of people use Active Directory. The more leading way for how we do authentication is with identity providers. And so what I've already done here is I've connected to Okta, but it could be Okta, Duo, Microsoft ADFS. It could be many different identity providers or corporate identity systems that you can tie into. And those often have more than just authorization. It does two-factor authentication. That helps us really validate who a person is. So if I kind of show you here, if I do a test login on this Okta, it's basically going to go over. I had already previously logged in. But now it's going to be doing a push notification that's being sent to my phone. And so with that, I'm going to head and say it's me. And of course, with that, I would be, it will be validated. It'll be logged in. So here we go. Coming back. Now I have a user. So that test worked. And what comes back from that would be the user's information as well as what roles they have. Often these roles or access permissions are identified in Active Directory or in the identity provider system. If not, we can identify service levels here inside of Ignition. You can, we want to do that principle of least privilege. So we want to lock things down. Any actions inside of the application, we lock down to people. So for example, if I'm logging to the configuration or the designer of Ignition, we want a role to protect that. So when they not everybody can go ahead and run that thing. We want only the people that have that particular role. So me, Travis, I have a manager role. And especially for the runtime, if we build applications, we want to limit things to those folks. So that was the first thing I wanted to kind of point out here is how to connect to that. And this is pretty simple. In Okta, we're basically just connecting up to our authorization URLs, and you can basically get the metadata URL, import all that. We have some good instructions on how to build identity providers or, of course, Active Directory, similar concepts. The next thing, though, is for us is setting up auditing. And within auditing and Ignition, I'm going to go over here, security, is we're going to create audit profile. And you have a couple options, databases or inside of Ignition. I prefer a SQL database because that's where we can store a lot of data. It's more accessible than just within Ignition. So I'm going to go ahead and create a connection to a MySQL database that I have here on my machine. And it is 192.168.10.220. And the database is 21 CFR 11. And so what we've already done ahead of time here, and this is important, we can make connections to other systems. We want to have secure connections. We also want a user who has, especially to a database, who has privileges only to insert new data or query data, but not modify data. And you may have different connections for different purposes. You may have some where you do want to modify data, but others where you want those electronic records to be intact, where you wouldn't. And so you'd set up users in the database that would have specific privileges on that database side. You'd also, in the database, set up encryption, other things. And there's good tutorials out there from MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and others for that to happen. So these are just some things you want to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Now I've got a valid connection and go to auditing. I'm going to set up an audit profile and just going to simply call it audit to that MySQL database. And this is where you can have pruning enabled if you want to, but if, for some time period, or you could just leave that and let it store, indefinitely. At some point, you have to think about that. But now I have the audit profile set up. Now we need to use the audit profile within Ignition. So on the general, this is where we can specify for the designer the configuration what authorization system we want to use. We can also come down here and specify the audit profile for that gateway that allows us, everything is tracked. So for example, if I go in and let's say I set up a journal profile here and for alarm history. And so I'm going to go ahead and just create one. Now that I had that audit profile set up, it did log a record. So if I look in the database, you're going to see that there was a gateway configuration added, the database journal settings and the alarm journal profile. We can see the details of that. So any changes that happen in the Ignition configuration are audited. We can see who did it, when they did it, and all of that. So for Ignition itself, you want to put the best practice in place for locking down the configuration and the designer and auditing all of that. And we also want to set up SSL. I'm not going to do that here, but you want to get an encrypted connection to the Ignition server, having an SSL certificate from your IT department or from a certificate authority there. So the last thing to point out real quick is under the backup and restore. We can make backups and single file backups. We have the ability under our gateway settings to automate that. We can schedule those backup settings and put a folder on that server or some shared directory. And ultimately, we can have these Ignition backups automatically that we can roll back to at some point. Now, if you're using Docker, it becomes really easy because you can, or VMs, you can create snapshots, that kind of stuff, for that configuration as well. All right, so that's kind of the backend configuration. Jeff, how much time do I have left?
2 minutes.
All right, so let's talk about the front end real quick. I'm going to go here to projects. I have a project that I'm going to import, but we are going to make this project available on our Ignition Exchange, so people can play around with this project. But what this is going to do, and I don't have time to basically go in and show the configuration, but I'm going to go ahead and log into this project, and you're going to see that it's going to go through, go through the authorization. So I'm going to log in, and I'm going to then send that push notification to my phone. So we are now logged in, and of course that got audited. So if I start looking at audits, you can see who, that it went from unauthenticated to authenticated, who that user was, and everything that we do in the application is going to be that. But let's say we wanted to do some action, maybe we're approving a quality sample, maybe we're changing a set point. We have to go through a validated process of having approval for that. So if I look at this, I want to change this mode to auto. If I want to change that tag, I'm going to first have some sort of person who wants to do that action log in and verify who they are. So again, let me do another push notification here. And with that, then now I know that I'm waiting for the verification from somebody else. So somebody else is probably going to go in there and get a notification, hey, there's a pending approval pending action that needs to happen. And they would go in. I'm just gonna, because I have privileges for both of these. This action was only performed by somebody who had a particular role, an operator role, and now the verifications by a manager. And so I have the manager role as well. So I can kind of showcase this quickly. I'm gonna log in, do one more push notification. And so now it's waiting for the person to complete that event, or it could have already completed. But for me, what I wanted is have somebody put in some comment. I am doing this because. And so when I do that, now that all got logged. And if I go to the audit profile, again, if I go back to the database and look at this, I can see all of those events that have happened, all of the e-signs, and the information that was related for who did that change, what that change happened to be, right? So all of that is in there. So it can happen for both the configuration and for the runtime, but it's just important that we lock down connections, that we make sure our data can't be messed with or tampered. We have this second form of authentication for the electronic signature that gets stored, in those records. That people can go back to and kind of have that accountability of those actions. And again, this applies to anybody. This is not just a pharmaceutical thing. There's a lot of industries where I want to start a new batch in manufacturing. And to do that, we may have procedures and we want to verify that person can do it and have signatures. Same kind of thing applies really to anybody, but of course, definitely to pharma. So hopefully with that was quick enough. Hopefully met time there. Jeff, back over to you.
Thank you. While you're taking host away, or I'm doing that, tell us again, you're going to post this project on the exchange?
Yeah, we did this project you see here. We're going to back it up, put it on the Ignition Exchange, ignitionexchange.com. Well, it'll be available either at the end of the day or early tomorrow, so everybody can go ahead and download it. You get an example of how to do that. That's two-form authentication within the client.
Cool. The name of the project?
But it's going to be called eSign, electronic
eSign.
signature. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis.
You're welcome.
All right. So Lenny, you're acting as the analytics hub here, right? You're doing all the calculations, event management. You're consuming data from historians and SQL databases. Do your piece.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. As you guys can imagine, as soon as we start turning data into information, it might become a little bit sensitive, especially if you're working with different departments, different organizations within the manufacturing environment. So I'm going to show a few things. First of all, how do I lock the configuration environment that someone might not be able to see the sensitive information pertaining to a different department? And then also looking at the front end, how do I just restrict people from viewing dashboard that they shouldn't view? How do we audit trail when they do make changes to the data, the underlying data? I'm going to demo all that for you guys here. So what you see in front of you, this is the flow configuration tool. As you can see, I've built quite a nice model here. I've got a batching plant, makes juice, and there's some pertaining KPIs that I'm monitoring. Notice that I've got a utilities department. I've got a packaging or an operations department. I've got a warehousing section. So first thing is probably I want to kind of segregate if the utilities guy go and log into the system, he should only be seeing his part of the model. If the production or the operations guy log in, he should only be seeing his part of the model. So really restricting who can see what from a model perspective. So I've got three guys. Three guys are walking into a bar, Paul, Brian, and Bob. No, it's not a start of a bad joke. They are real people, Paul, Brian, and Bob. All right, so I'm gonna play with those personas. Bob is my utilities guy, Brian is my packaging guy, and then Paul is the admin. Paul can do kind of everything. So I'm currently logged in with Paul. So you'll notice at the bottom here, I can see that Paul is logged in. He's got a little shield next to his name. That means Paul is Mr. Admin. All right, how did I make Paul admin? Well, if I go to the secure or the user section within Flow, I can go and create different groups within the configuration. So I've created a group for the production guys. I've created a group for the utilities guys. And this is linked to Windows 80. So I can go and add Windows users from my AD into these different groups within Flow. So if I want to do that, I'm going to go and say, let's add a Windows user. I'm going to add myself. And now I am part of the utility section. All right. Paul and Brian is part of the production crowd. And if I'm looking at the admins, only Paul is an administrator. You can belong to more than one group. As you can see, Paul belongs to admin, Paul belongs to production, Paul belongs to utilities. So when I log in with Paul, I can pretty much see everything from the model side. All right, let's log in with Bob. So I've got these sessions already created. So I'm going to connect here to Bob. And that will open up Bob's session here. And there we go. All right, Bob's going to log in. So when you log in the first time into the Flow config tool, it will ask you for a username and password. If you leave it blank, we will use your current Windows credentials that you currently log in. So I'm automatically going to log in with Bob. So if I connect to that, it's going to go and log in. It's going to load my model, or what I'm allowed to see from a model perspective. And if I expand my model here, after I'm loading, me as Bob should only see the utilities section. So right, it's just busy loading up all the different components. And when it's done with that, I should see only the part of the model that I am allowed to see. Right, sorry, it's just listing all the charts. There we go. And if I expand that, there we go. I can only see the utility section. The rest is highlighted with a little shield icon. I do not have access to that part of the model, so I cannot see the underlying information for those different departments. I can still see utilities, and I can go and see what information and KPIs is created from my utilities perspective. Again, if we do that and I go and connect to Brian, again, same story. I'm going to open up Brian's session. And again, he's going to connect to his system. And again, Brian will now only see the production side. So that's how we can go and filter and only allow certain people to see certain parts of the information model and only see the information that's dependable for their eyes, or should be available for their eyes. So that's one part of it. That's securing the actual model with the calculations with the KPIs. There's also the concept of, all right, who's the personas that I can actually deliver graphics or front end or dashboards and reports to? So I also have the capability to limit what they can see. So let's just look at that. There we go. I cannot see utilities, but I can see the packaging section here. All right, let's go back to Paul, which is the admin guy. And it's just going to be easier, sorry, to work from that screen. What? Cool. All right. So we're back with Paul. He's the full-on admin. Paul can then also go and decide, okay, from the dashboards, who's allowed to see what? So if I go to the packaging dashboard section, I can see that the production group is assigned. So I have only the production people that is allowed to see this part of the dashboard. Okay, so limiting the access to the model and then also limiting the access to the front end or the visualization side. So if we go to the visualization side here, if I go and log in as Paul, I would be able to see all my dashboards as I have access to the entire information model. So there I can see all of my dashboards there, and I have access to my production dashboard from that perspective. So there we can see my dashboard. I can go and drill into this, so I can see exactly how a certain value has been calculated. We give you the exact calculation in the front end that's been used to get to a certain KPI. So I can see here my quality percentage is made up of my good product and my bad product. I can drill into my total production there. That's the sum of good production, bad production, drill into my bad production there. And this will now actually show me the raw data that we got from the underlying data source to actually make that information. So a full drill in capability all the way to the raw data there. At any point in time, I can also see what is the current version of this KPI. So currently it's version 1. Nobody changed any underlying data. Nothing has changed from that perspective. So we do keep a full-on version control from that. And I can add comments. So I can add a comment that will be stamped with my name. So nothing is really wrong here. So all is good. And that will then be saved against my name in our database as well. If I do sign out from this perspective, and I do log in with one of the other actors, so if I log in with Bob, which is the utility guy, and enter in his credentials, Bob can only see the engineering section of that. if Bob is a bit naughty and he goes and maybe try and see some of the other dashboards, sorry, I just want to move this. So let's say he wants to try and go and look at the production guy's dashboard. Well, sorry for you, you're not authorized to view, and all of the information is kind of out of reach from that perspective. Cool. Let's quickly sign out again. Let's log in with Paul. And let's just show how do we actually trace if someone does make changes to data points. All right, so Paul obviously has the capability to go and look at his production data. So we give him the capability from a form perspective to go and change some of the underlying data. So he can go and add maybe cases to warehouse or cases lost. And he can go now and manually enter in information. So in this case, I had 22 cases lost for that production run. If we do that, that gets now stamped into the database against the name. What was the original version of that value? We always version it up, always keep it in the database. So you've got a full audit trail of the life of a value point. And you can see by the little orange dot there, that shows us very clearly that there was a change in the data from that perspective. So that's how we keep track. That's how we keep track from any changes that's made from a data or KPI perspective. We also make change or track changes that's made within the configuration tool itself. So if I, for whatever reason, make any changes to any of the config, if I change the format here to show me 2 decimal points rather than just 1, that automatically gets stored in the changelog. We don't have to configure that. It's native within the product. So if I look at the changelog there, it can say, okay, Paul, if I refresh, Paul just now changed the format setting to 0.00. So all of that is logged within the tool. From a backupping perspective, if I go to my system menu here and look at the properties, I do have the capability to create auto backups. So that will create a backup every day when we do maintenance on the solution. So you will have a brand new SQL database backup at the end of every day. To restore that, unfortunately, you have to go and do a full SQL restore if you want to go back to a previous version, but the capability from an auto backup perspective is within the tool as well. You can give it a nice name for a format there, and that will then create daily backups of your flow system. This includes the config as well as the underlying KPI information and data that gets stored within the flow database. Cool. How's that for time, Jeff? All right.
Perfect time. And thank you for the IntegrateLive color theme on your dashboards.
Perfect. Cool.
Well noted. It brings up a principle of the idea of keeping validated data inside of validated databases. Amy and Josh and I were talking about that a couple of days ago. I think Lenny, you might have been on that call, where you're not replicating data already in the historian, you're letting Canary do its thing. So once Canary is validated, you're just querying that data to run your calcs, not replicating, right?
Exactly. We call it the single source of the truth. So we can always drill down to where the actual data comes from so we can understand what the result of our KPIs and calculations are.
Perfect. All right. We are at 90 minutes in. We've got some questions to hit. Let's go through it. For those that have stayed on with us, thank you so much. We do appreciate that. Any questions that you have, make sure they're in now. And I'm just going to start at the top of the question list. Kyle, you know it's coming. First one's coming to you.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Brad wants to know, hey, where's full SPB integration on Kepware's roadmap? So Spark V integration support within Kepware, is it on the roadmap? What do you have?
Great. Well, thanks, Brad, for the question. I actually I get $1 for every time someone asks that, so I'm going to retire right after this webinar here. But no, so I kind of have two answers. So one being the official answer, which is it is not currently on our roadmap. The second answer, and PM's not on this, so it'll be fine. But we are looking into we're in the research phase for our major V7 release coming up in the next. In the future. So we're in the research phase. A large part of that research is around industrial data ops, how we handle that and how we can kind of look into that. Sparkplug B is in the discussions. I'm definitely a pain in the butt to our PM team about trying to integrate that in. But as of right now, it is officially not on the roadmap. But I'm hoping that changes in the future.
Cool. So what can we do to help the Kepware project managers know the community's request for that? Is there a feedback loop?
I can find something. We used to have a little bit more official form, but basically anytime you talk to sales or if you talk to us, we do log that for, on our end. So just if you're talking to someone from Kepware, just mention it. We take note of it.
All right. Other questions that have come in. Emmanuel had a question about 20 minutes ago, Steve, while you're going, saying SQL and Canary DB, two different ones. You just want to frame out how SQL is used within Canary.
Or does he mean storing data both in a SQL database and a Canary database?
I'm not sure.
That's how I took it. Which you can do, which people do. They use a tag history splitter, and you can store data in both of those. But as far as our database is not SQL based, it is a proprietary database, time series database, so it's non-SQL.
Okay, I see. You're thinking it came in on the Ignition conversation.
I don't know.
I think it did.
Some different. Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Any other questions for the audience or for the panel? Sorry.
To add to from just my Canary experience, like the audit logs can be stored in their own SQL database. So maybe that's what they were asking about.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah, by default we store it in a SQLite database.
Okay. I did drop in the webinar chat a link to the white paper that Travis showed. So if you'd like that, please grab it from there. And then also, again, would love to have anybody that would like to attend the UAF webinar tomorrow or to get a recording of that. Please, hopefully we'll see you on that. With that, that is all the questions that we had. So Amy, Josh, the audience will never understand the amount of work that the guides do to put this together. So thank you for all your prep work. Thank you for extending my knowledge on 21 CFR. And I speak for the rest of the audience. I'm sure the same. And to our vendors, again, the work that you put into it, it's always much appreciated and it always shows. So with that, we'll conclude this virtual workshop. Next Wednesday, we're live on LinkedIn and on the YouTube channel with the rundown. We'll be talking more about life sciences and more about data security and best practices. Thank you, everybody.